Call this meeting to order. We can't afford a gavel down here. The clerk will take note that all the council are present. Woody's just out taking care of his vehicle for the moment. Renata, what do you want to do with, or Mr. Chairman, what do you want to do in terms of your roll call?
You can just do roll call if you have the list of commissioners here. Thank you.
I sure do. Okay. Messina,
Here?
Ingalls.
Here.
Fleming.
Here.
Luttrop.
Here.
Ward.
Here.
Mendel. McCracken.
Thank you.
Okay, this meeting is truly a workshop, a teaching opportunity or learning opportunity, whichever way you want to look at it. We aren't taking any public input at this time. There will be opportunity down the road for public hearings. And I am going to turn it over to our Community Planning Director, Hillary Anderson.
Hey, great. Well, good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commission members. City staff, our partners at CDA 2030, and our consultants with MIG are pleased to bring forward the final draft of the city's comprehensive plan update for years 2022 to 2042 for review and discussion. So really, the workshop purpose is to bring you together, to kind of convene you, to review and recap all the public engagement and collaboration that has taken place on this for the last 27 months, to review the document. We're sharing with you that final document in printed copy. It's been provided available online as well. We're here to answer any questions, address any of your concerns, and really just prepare for public hearings and adoption. So Sean and I were here before you in June of 2019 to present this collaboration opportunity with CDA 2030 and to seek your support to hire MIG to help us update our comprehensive plan. That was 31 months ago. So the goal with updating our plan is really to make sure it meets all of the state requirements, but also to make sure it's the community's plan and that it is forward-facing, that it's expanded and helps provide the specificity that Planning Commission and City Council have been looking for when making and evaluating land use requests. It includes a beefed-up version of previous comprehensive plans. It has a transportation element that's really an analysis of how land use affects transportation and providing some mitigation for that, as well as expanded economic development focus. It also includes a future land use map and place types to aid with those land use decisions. We've been working tirelessly for 27 months on this plan, and the plan has been validated by our community members. We've gone above and beyond with community engagement efforts, and now we are really ready to address any of your final concerns and ask for adoption in the next month so that we can start taking action on some of our city priorities. So what is Envision Coeur d'Alene? It is a unified community vision. It's a collaborative community engagement effort. So when we came to you earlier in 2019, we talked to you about having this effort where we can work together with CDA 2030 to engage our community members, to make sure we're creating a vision that matches our community members' vision for the future, and to create a long-range planning project. So for the city of Coeur d'Alene, it would be our comprehensive plan, and for CDA 2030, it would be their vision validation and implementation plan. They are ultimately two distinct work products, and they're autonomous plans. So while we work together on the visioning effort and evaluating community priorities, our comprehensive plan is our own, and it has a lot more and different elements than CDA 2030's plan. So today's focus is on the city's comprehensive plan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our new Executive Director of CDA 2030, JJ Odell, to talk more about the partnership and the benefit of this collaboration on the Envision Coeur d'Alene project.
Thank you, Hillary. As the new Executive Director of CDA 2030, I look forward to continuing our collaborative partnership with the city as we move toward a brighter future together. Community visioning is a collaborative process of giving the people who live, work, and play in a place the opportunity to have a say about what they want their community to be like in the future. Broadly, community visioning considers the things people love about their community and want to retain, the challenges and issues they want to address and solve, new changes they'd like to see become a part of their community fabric. Through this process, a community might imagine what it wants to be like in a few years, or it might look ahead to 20 years and even beyond. Community visioning can result in a big picture statement, a series of statements, or in our case, become the heart of a detailed community plan. Envision Coeur d'Alene created not only a plan, but an improved partnership to move our community vision forward. The original CDA 2030 framework is familiar and has been embraced amongst community partners who will be leading the non-city related actions. CDA 2030's involvement in Envision amplifies the results from former comprehensive plans by making it actionable and taking it from a city focus to a broader community focus. As many of you remember, in June 2014, the Council passed a resolution to adopt the CDA 2030 implementation plan. 48% of the actions were led by the City of Coeur d'Alene. Part 3 of the city's new comprehensive plan, as developed through the Envision Coeur d'Alene collaboration, is built on the framework that CDA 2030 created in 2014 with a community vision statement and 6 focus areas. Using this framework as a model for Part 3 allowed the Envision team to reinforce the community outreach work done in 2014. The framework also fulfills the city's state requirement for visioning, the required topics for inclusion in the new city comprehensive plan, as well as updating action items to be included in a new CDA 2030 implementation plan. A strategic partnership was a natural fit in that we wanted to provide a singular public process resulting in 2 unified plans, enhance each other's staff and financial resources, increase citizen participation in the development of the plan, streamline the engagement process from a citizen's perspective. During the Envision process, which Alex will review here shortly, the project management team utilized community volunteers and CDA 2030 staff, as well as community planning staff. CDA 2030 staff, our volunteer board, and committee members spent thousands of hours reviewing and refining the actions in Part 3 of the plan. We look forward to the new plan and our partnership to continue to serve our community. Community feedback has questioned why the city would be involved in certain actions. In response to the feedback, we split the actions among convening authorities to clarify the roles of the partnership. CDA 2030 supports community-focused actions, such as those involving childcare. The City of Coeur d'Alene convenes over actions directly involving them, such as suggested changes to city code and partnerships with other government-focused agencies. And joint actions have been designated where our interests overlap, such as lake health. Once the Envision process is complete, CDA 2030 will continue to add value by monitoring and tracking the plan to ensure progress and stay true to our community's vision. CDA 2030 will also continue to spark action, enhance collaboration, and act as neutral conveners as we work on priority actions such as lake education and management, quality childcare and education, and housing choice and affordability. CDA 2030 will continue to collaborate with the city and support other lead partners to make sure our community moves the vision and plan forward. As the new executive director, stepping into this Envision project as recently as December, it's difficult to quickly grasp all the concepts in play. From the beginning, a team of dedicated CDA 2030 board and volunteer committee members have participated in this process, some of whom are here in the audience today. If there are any questions later in the workshop regarding convening authority or joint actions, those can be addressed to the key CDA 2030 staff and board members in attendance. Thank you.
Right. Welcome aboard, JJ. We are looking forward to working together with you, and also wanted to put out there how much staff appreciates all of your help, all the volunteers, and the hours that it took to put together this staff report, as well as the plan. So, welcome and thank you for attending today's joint Planning Commission and City Council workshop. We have a lot to get through today, and there are 2 points that staff has set up for questions and answers that will be facilitated by the mayor. But if you have a pressing question, feel free to ask. But hopefully we will answer your questions as we step through this presentation. So this is today's agenda. The first bullet point will address the why the cities have to have a comp plan. The second point will describe how and who was engaged in the creation of the plan. The third point, staff will step through the 4 parts of the plan. And then I will step through how you will use the plan in staff reports in the future, as well as the 2 points that we will have Q&A. That will be followed by Hillary, who will discuss the timeline and other efforts that are slated in the near future when the plan is adopted. So let's begin this and talk about the Coeur d'Alene plan. So it's a long-range vision that provides, that guides future growth decisions and land use planning for the next 20 years within the city. It addresses the state of Idaho's comprehensive plan requirements that all cities and counties within Idaho must address. It also incorporates implementation measures and strategies to say how we want to achieve the community's vision over the next 20 years. So as part of that, we have mentioned the state a couple of times now. I want to read the marching orders that we receive from the state of Idaho. So this is Title 67, State Government and State Affairs, Chapter 65, Local Land Use Planning. So planning duties: it shall be the duty of Planning or Planning and Zoning Commission to conduct a comprehensive planning process designed to prepare, implement, and review and update a comprehensive plan, hereinafter referred to as the plan. The plan shall include all of land within the jurisdiction of the governing board. The plan shall consider previous and existing conditions, trends, compatibility of land uses, desirable goals and objectives, or desirable future situations for each planning component. The plan with maps, charts, and reports shall be based on the following components as they may apply to land use regulations and actions unless the plan specifies reasons why a particular component is unneeded. And we'll discuss that a little bit more in the future. So ultimately, we have direction from the state that says we have to do this. But why do we do this? We do this to address future requests that serve our citizens, our friends and families, our economy, and our visitors. So this pretty much sums up what I said in the different points. But it's also important to recognize what a plan does not do, what the comprehensive plan doesn't do. It does not change zoning, so it does not change what the uses by right are for existing land use in the city of Coeur d'Alene. It does not change building codes or other requirements, but it does provide a foundation for making decisions into the future. So now I'll turn the presentation over to Alex Dupy, our consultant from MIG, to review the public engagement process.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you, everybody, for having me in this afternoon. It's great seeing everybody's faces again after almost 2 years of pandemic. Once again, my name's Alex Dupy. I'm with MIG. We were the consultant lead for this project. And I just want to spend a few slides or a few moments talking about the plan and how it was developed with and through community input. We did an extensive amount of community input, both in person and virtual, to really develop both the framework that Hillary discussed early on, but also get down to specific actions as a part of the plan. So the plan truly was developed through community support and community involvement. So I will step through. Just to give you a summary of the various elements that we had, we started with a community in-person kickoff in September of 2019. We followed that up with advisory committee meetings as well as executive team meetings which includes both City Council, Planning Commission, and the CDA 2030 Executive Board. We use that information to quickly start to develop a series of vision and action items that we could start to both vet as well as consider, from an organization standpoint, how does this actually start to be incorporated into a future comprehensive plan and more specifically implementation strategy that is also required by the state. In December 2019, we had our first Community Advisory Committee meeting, as well as a series of focus groups focused on specific types of projects: economic development, education, environment, housing, and other core elements that we heard from the community process. That was the last time we met in person for the process. We were supposed to be back in March of 2020, and as you know, COVID became a thing across the world, and so we quickly transitioned into a virtual environment, both at the Planning Commission and City Council level, but also at the community level as well. We continued our process with a variety of different surveys, as well as virtual open houses. We looked at both vision, principles, and goals through survey. We looked at community priorities that were both policy as well as land use. We also hosted a virtual open house in June of 2021 to refine and review the draft plan. So with that input, we've continued to refine as we've gone forward, but also get to the point where we are today, where we have a draft plan that we're looking forward to your input on, but also move into the next step, hopefully, which will be the hearing process, which will be our next public engagement activity. Just to give you a quick summary, our public kickoff in September of 2019, we had over 80 attendees, and if you were there, we've actually played a board game. Sorry, I've been on virtual world too long. We played a board game that looked at land use and a series of trade-offs for, how could Coeur d'Alene grow or evolve over the next 20 years. City staff took that and had game nights at schools, at their own places, in their dining rooms, and all of that information became part of the project. We hosted a series of focus groups with over 65 members. We had 23 meetings of focus groups centered on those core principles. We engaged community service organizations. We also had 5 public surveys that had over 1,400 participants with 11,500 data points. So an extensive amount of community engagement that went into this plan at a variety of different scales, and also I would say platforms, which is very important because with projects like these, a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. You have to have a variety of in-person and online opportunities to be able to provide input on the project. And that's what we did, and that's what we'll continue to do through the process, or through this project. Just to give you a sense of some of the things we did, that's a very yellow cursor. We started off, this was some early visioning we did with community partners. We looked at different things for a vision, opportunities and constraints. We had our public kickoff, which had a number of different, it had families, it had a number of different community members where we asked about different trade-offs and different ways that Coeur d'Alene could grow or evolve over time. Just some examples of people playing games. We actually took roles. What if you were a public works director, or you were an environmental advocate, or you were a transportation advocate? What are some of the choices you would have to make as a part of making decisions about the city? And we had some great results, and we had about 20 or so of these games with several hundred participants over the course of the game nights and the public kickoff that started to tell us what key important factors were and where growth should occur or not occur. What are areas that are very important to protect as they are today? We also looked at vision. What does Coeur d'Alene look like in 20 years from now? How do we get there? What are some of the challenges that we have to overcome to be able to achieve that vision? So all of these established that vision and that framework that we took to the advisory committee and focus groups that really started to break down each of those core elements, those 6 principles that we started to work around to essentially establish that policy framework. We went old school and actually cut pieces of paper apart where there were statements that people had said or that were action items within your existing comprehensive plan to be able to reorganize and to order and to update, to be able to provide what we have today as an implementation plan that is very germane to the discussion about growth in Coeur d'Alene over the next 20 years. So it's interesting just looking back to see how far we've come from where we've started from those core elements of those basic visioning exercises and those games to the work that the advisory committee did to refine and bring that forward, to get into our first actual survey, which we did in early 2020, that actually started to vet some of these pieces. So again, we went out to the public again to make sure that those actions and those visions, that vision element and those objectives, were really starting to speak to what people had told us. So we did a vision and goals survey. We took that and we went back after we had looked at a series of land use alternatives, which we discussed in previous meetings, to get a sense of where growth should occur over time. How should we protect neighborhoods? What does that look like as a series of nodes or focus areas that we want to be more walkable, or we want to be able to focus growth there as opposed to other places? These are just some examples of some heat maps from what the citizens provided us in terms of input. And then finally, this past summer, we have the draft plan together. We wanted to make sure that we had another round of engagement. And so we hosted 2 virtual open houses, as well as a survey, as well as an interactive land use map. So all of those core pieces of the comprehensive plan were reviewed and vetted by the public. We took that input and again refined the comprehensive plan to be able to provide this to you today. I do want to stress with this virtual open house, we also offered in-person drop-in sessions. So anybody could schedule a time to come in and speak to a planner or somebody else with the city if there are specific questions that they wanted to address. So this included both virtual and in-person opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alex. Alex just went through all of the extensive input that we had received and where we had received it. And so how did that boil down, or how did that become part of the plan itself? And so the information that Alex just provided was in part 1, but there are some additional things that are in part 1 as well. So it's the comprehensive planning in Idaho that I already went through, but this is part 1. It's also very important to stress that in the beginning of this process, Planning Commission as well as City Council asked staff to engage them throughout the process. We heard loud and clear that you didn't want us to bring a completed plan forward to you where there wasn't input along the way. And so we did that. We brought that forward for your input numerous times, and we do appreciate the feedback that we had received. So part 1. The plan background and organization establishes the foundation of the plan and describes the partnership between the City of Coeur d'Alene and Coeur d'Alene 2030. This document also incorporates the work established by Partnerships of Coeur d'Alene 30 by providing an implementation framework that builds upon the community-generated implementation strategy. Part 1 also provides an overview of comprehensive planning requirements in Idaho, including property rights, and a summary of public engagement throughout the development process. So, I alluded to earlier that the state requires certain elements. There are 17 elements that are required by the state. These can be found in part 1 of our plan. Right here highlighted in blue are those 17 required elements. They range starting from property rights, which can be found on page 14 through 15 of the plan. The population, the current population. It addresses school facilities and transportation, which are fact-based, provided by the School District 271, as well as some of our higher education areas. There's an economic development piece that's required. This is where our sub-consultant Bridge really stepped up and took a look at where we fit in the market and what our neighbors are doing and how we can support one another into the future. There's a land use element that comes a little bit later in the plan, but it shows where that can be found. So as I move through here, natural resources, hazardous areas, public services, facilities, and utilities are included. Transportation, this was another piece that we dove into with Kittleson. And KMPO were our partners in this. We produced a document that we brought forward and presented to Planning Commission and City Council. Recreation is an element, special areas, housing, community design, Implementation, which is part 3, we've touched on that. That was where Coeur d'Alene 2030 really helped out. National interest electric transmission corridors and public airport facilities. So these last 2 items we do not have within our city limits or ACI, but we do point to our airport plan that will be adopted by reference, that is to the north of us. So inside of the plan, you can see here, the 17 items were already pointed out, but part 1 and what falls into part 1, this is part 2, this section is part 3, and then part 4 right here in each one of those elements and where they can be found so that we know we're in compliance with the state. All right, next part. So part 2 is about Coeur d'Alene, provides a general overview of the community demographics, city parks, neighborhoods, the transportation network, and it includes economy and market position within the region. So you can see these items listed here. These were generated by local, state, and national data. Education, like I had mentioned, comes from higher education as well as School District 271. Mentioned Bridge Economics and Kittleson as well, and that information can be found in part 2 of the plan. So what does that look like? These are a little bit of a screen captures. It's not meant to be reviewed at this time, but this is what it looks like inside of the plan, some of our demographics and heat maps that Alex has referred to, as well as some pictures over time, for all the way back to the history of Coeur d'Alene and the relationships and the construction that has happened. Transportation element, so we dove deep using what we had in GIS as well as input from our city departments to define where our bicycle trails are and where they are perceived to go, where those plans say that those connections need to be completed, our current sidewalk system, as well as public transit. So part 3, so this is, like I had mentioned earlier, where Coeur d'Alene 2030 really stepped in and we combined our efforts here. So policy framework describes the plan's vision, the 6 guiding principles, and supporting goals and objectives. Each objective described in the policy framework includes a number of prioritized actions that assign lead and supporting partners and can be found in Appendix A. So community vision. It's a vision that's broad, a statement that encapsulates the intended direction for Coeur d'Alene. This statement captures where the community wants to go and what it wants to be by the year 2042. Guiding principles. So there are 6 guiding principles in the comprehensive plan. Guiding principles are major themes that address one element of the vision. They are further defined by goals and objectives to guide future land use and development decisions and provide a framework for partnerships to help achieve the plan's vision. Then the next section, as we move through these, they get refined and they go a little bit deeper at each level. And so we're at the goal section, which is each guiding principle includes goals that provide broad direction that align with community priorities. Goals are statements that help set directions for future actions. We're to the objective section, which are statements that provide general guidance for implementing goals through one or more actions. Each goal has one or more objective. And so I'll get into this a little bit in the future of the presentation, but as you guys take a look at land use decisions that come before you, this is the area that will be reviewed at a level where you're making those decisions. The actions are very defined, and those are projects, programs, or activities which support implementation of goals and objectives and are measurable. This is the implementation portion that the state requires. Action items are included in Appendix A. And so this portion is found in Part 3. And then this portion is found in the appendix, where over time, as we complete actions or actions may change or be updated, that it is easy. We don't have to go back into the full document itself and try and update the whole document. So this appendix piece will have periodic action review and updates. So these are the guiding principles. These can be found in page 33. There's a definition of each of those. I won't read them into the record, but the description of each is in there. I think that's pretty apparent what they are just based on their titles. So you've seen this slide once already, and this shows the structure of our unified vision and implementation plans for each of our organizations. And today's focus is on the city of Coeur d'Alene, and so there are 55 joint actions with our community partners, as described by JJ earlier. Those are where we share the goal and the objectives to get to fruition for each one of those actions, and then there's 71 specific City of Coeur d'Alene actions for a total of 125 that are shared between Coeur d'Alene 2030 and the city. All right, so what does the appendix look like? And this is, earlier in the slide, I showed you, this is the portion that will be updated and we'll bring back to Planning Commission and City Council to let everyone know what our progress looks like. So this is at the end, and you can see here we have environment and recreation, and the goal is to provide diverse recreation options. This is goal ER2. The objective of ER 2.3 is to encourage and maintain public access to mountains, natural areas, parks, and trails that are easily accessible by walking and biking. So now is when the columns come into play. So there's a timing element, the convening authority, the lead partner, supporting partners, and then if it involves city departments, which city department takes the lead there. And under the actions here, we devised a very specific way to keep track of these. So action ER 2.3 points to the objective, and then C is for city, and this is the first city-led action for ER 2.3. Down here, you can see 2.3J is for joint, and is the first one that we have for the joint actions under ER 2.3. You can see here what those actions are and what the time frame is. And so, before we move on to part 4 of the plan, staff would like to turn over the presentation to Mayor Hammond to facilitate any questions that the Planning Commission or City Council may have. And then, Mayor, when you reconvene or turn this back over to staff, it'll be Alex's point for the presentation. Thank you.
As unprepared as I am, are there questions or discussion points that you would like to bring up at this time? Dan?
Well, I just had a question when I went to, let's see, looking at page 18, and it talks about the education, and it mentioned City of Coeur d'Alene fortunate to have 2 higher education assets, NIC, University of Idaho, and I'm wondering what LCSC thinks about, I mean, only having 2, I mean, 2 are mentioned, but don't we have LCSC should be in there too, or, and this is page 18 on the education. I'm not sure,
I guess we're looking at our plan and we see page 18, and that is
unless I
Go to
have,
page 26.
26.
oh. And on mine, let's see, education, development, and market position, and then it goes, and I could point that out later, but it just
25.
seems like,
Here it is,
okay.
35, higher
That-
education for Lena's home.
Oh, we have LCSC.
LCSC.
Who's missing?
And there's Lewis and Clark, so you got it, this is updated.
Oh, it is
Yes.
updated.
Yeah,
This
it does
is.
say.
Yep.
Somebody
Okay,
caught
I guess I
that.
got the old,
The
okay,
digital is different pagination.
okay,
for sure.
well, but LCSC is
I
in
found
there.
that out.
Yes, it is.
Okay, good, okay, thanks.
Oh,
What else
okay.
is missing from our packet?
Other questions?
Packages.
Tom?
And probably Sean Hillary, just for clarification, the CDA 2030 plan is more of an it's more of a plan to implement things that we saw in 1 year, 5 years, or how many years it might be, which is different than what our comp plan is, which we use as commissioners for planning to make our decisions, which we use more goals and objectives. And that's kind of how the CDA plan and the comp plan kind of meld together. Because in the beginning, I was trying to figure out, how does CDA work with planning and zoning, and how is all that going to work? And since we've done all these meetings over the years, I've seen how they meld together, but they're two separate entities. One is more of a planning and zoning tool that we have to use to make decisions on any hearings we have, and the CDA plan is more of a broad scope over many years of whoever the joint people involved are going to try to get those objectives made. Is that kind of where?
Yes and no. So our comprehensive plan that is before you also has an implementation plan. And that's where, when Sean was going through those different, kind of the joint action items and the city action items, that's in our plan. And then CDA 2030 has its own implementation plan that they'll be finalizing, that'll have CDA 2030 actions, that they'll be the lead, kind of the convening authority, and then our same 55, I think, joint action items. But they're kind of separate documents, it's just they're organized by the vision, goals, objectives. And so, you're right, ours, the bulk of, I guess it's section 4 is really your land use, and so that's where you will often see the comprehensive plan coming before you for land use decisions. And so that part of it is that, but there's other parts of the plan that Sean will kind of talk about, other uses of this. Many communities use it as a strategic plan, so it's broader than just land use decisions, but that's where you'll see it most often in council as well, as you get an annexation request or zone change coming before you.
Mr. Chair, just quick. So if anything that comes before us will come before us through the planning department, not CDA 2030?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Right, it was more a collaboration to do community visioning, but this plan before you is the city's comprehensive plan. It's separate from what CDA 2030's documents will be.
Dan?
Well, just one other, I guess, maybe a comment on it as I went through, and at least on the part I had, it was page 28, but talking about housing and different housing types, and it may be somewhere, some talk of an action item, but it was an area concern for me. It said, mobile homes have decreased by half since 2010, when approximately 8.1% of housing stock were mobile homes. And I guess I wonder, in part, well, why is that? And I know, economic forces and all of that. And at the same time, when we need all of the housing stuff, and I guess somewhere just in this whole thing, I hope that it's like, well, we need to recognize on that beginning level or on the, for senior level, that mobile homes are those that's a real identifiable, affordable housing thing that is going away. And maybe market forces are in charge of that and we have no hope, but I want to raise it. And if there's something we can do, what can we do to protect or encourage that? So that was just a comment.
I'm ready. Thanks for teeing that up. I had a couple questions. They were on the same page, but I'll start with answering that question. Housing and Growth Issues Partnership has mentioned this throughout the region just recently about the ability to move forward this voluntary program where mobile home tenants can become owners of the property. And there's an organization that has a base out of Spokane that works throughout the Northwest. And what they are able to do is to turn these mobile home park tenants into an owners association that owns shares of the dirt that their mobile home is on. What that does is allow that person to have some control in the future of their park rents, as well as control the maintenance and operations of that business. And it also helps appreciate the value of their mobile home rather than what's common as a depreciation. So currently, all of the city council members and staff who are involved in the working group of the partnership have this information in front of them. And the hope is that within the next 2 meetings, we will be able to put out a good white paper, if you will, that will help these owners of these properties understand that they are not going to suffer any loss of their investment should they decide to move forward with an option for their tenants to purchase from them. And these organizations will help and facilitate that. So it's an educational piece that's being put out through the region that focuses directly on preserving that affordable income piece, living piece, especially for seniors. So it's out there.
So Councilman, would that affect or apply mostly to the Oak Crest and that other one across Ramsey, the big established park, as opposed to, and that's most of our stock, I think, is in those kind of deals. And then the rest is where we see kind of a hodgepodge around the Fruitland Lane area or what would it be applicable for all those areas or more the established Oak Crest type?
It would be applicable for all of them. Some of them have mobile home properties that own the real estate that are mixed in there. But whenever there's a group that's an actual organized mobile home park, it would be applicable to those. Oak Crest, unfortunately, is a sad story. It just sold in August. And so it won't have the opportunity for those tenants to be able to do that. And there's some heartbreaking things going on there, and it's pushing me forward to moving this out regionally sooner than later. The important thing is, and I hope you all share this message as I say it, this isn't something that the government gets involved in. This isn't something that our tax dollars go into, and it isn't something that takes away any of the rights of the landowner that sells to their tenants. It allows them to be the hero, and it allows the tenants to become owners and control their destiny. And that's what's really the most important thing in programs like that. And so these companies have representatives who will work with these landowners, will work with these tenants one-on-one, and help them facilitate these programs. So I hope whenever you have the opportunity to talk about it, you're supportive and encouraging to have anyone move those forward. That was my piece on answering that question. But I did have another comment on a couple questions and a comment. Unless anyone had further about that, I'm happy to talk about it, obviously, all day long.
I just wanted to mention that one thing we can do is to stop rezoning the MH zone into other zones. And I reminded council of this the last time this happened, which was 2 years ago. And we rezoned mobile homes into, I think it was R17. And I reminded council at the time that this is affordable housing. But we rezoned it anyway.
That was for 2 lots. It wasn't for a mobile home park, correct?
No, it was an MH rezone. So I just want to say, if that's what you want to do, if you want to keep them around, let's stop zoning them out of existence.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I knew which one you were talking about, because I thought that that was not a mobile home park, but one that was zoned that way, but it didn't have multiple units on it.
Tom?
And now I'm going to address this to Hillary and Sean, because if that's something comes to us, Stan said, stop it, how do you stop that without a zone change being, well, we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to make that zone change anymore. We have to go by the new comp plan that has goals and objectives in there. So I understand what Kiki's saying. I kind of hear what Dan's saying. But how do we practically do that in the real world if we don't make some sort of decision, city council makes a decision saying, well, we're not going to do that anymore?
Sure. So when these applications come before you, there's a host of findings that need to be made. And one of those is the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is a guiding document. So it'll say, we envision at some point in the future that this land use may be X, Y, or Z. And there's nothing that says you have to do that. You know, the timing, those other pieces, all of the different, I guess, the testimony that's before you that night, the staff report, the comprehensive plan, all of those pieces come together to help you come to a decision. So there's nothing that's going to force Planning Commission or City Council to say, we have to do this. You know, it's really up to those bodies to decide. So, but like Dan said, well, we have some MH8. Well, I just spoke with a gentleman yesterday who owns a pretty substantial size piece of MH8 that only has a single family house on it. It doesn't even have a mobile home on it right now. And he asked, what is the chance of getting rezoned to R17 so that we can do apartments or twin homes or something that MH8 doesn't take into consideration? Well, that's a different type of housing. It can or cannot be affordable depending on what the market brings forward. But some of these questions can be answered as Alex moves into part 4, which is where we're headed in a moment. So I guess I don't have a perfect answer for you. MH8 doesn't always mean that there's going to be a bunch of mobile homes or a mobile home park there in the future, and there are other zones that allow more density than 8 units per acre. It may allow 17, or by special use permit 34. So I guess I don't have a perfect answer, but those are the tools.
And we'll talk about part 4 within the comprehensive plan in just a moment, but the new element within this comprehensive plan is a land use map, which is not something you've had in the past. And so while the future land use map doesn't change existing zoning, it does provide guidance for those future conversations about zone change and vision and values that are also part of that. So that will help in some ways to provide some guidance on whether or not those zone changes are appropriate. And so again, it's a policy question for you as decision makers and policy makers, but this is an added element that is required by state law, but that will help, hopefully inform some of those decisions in the future.
Thank you.
The conversation with regard to affordable housing has, at least in my view, and in the most recent election campaign, centered around younger workers who were getting a start in life and couldn't afford rent or purchase of a home. But the mobile home park brings to light something that we also need to be aware of, and that is that North Idaho, and Coeur d'Alene particularly, have a disproportionate number of seniors. And so we have to be just as cognizant of that whole senior population and affordable housing for them as well. And I think as we look down the road toward rezones of mobile home park, aren't they now modular? Isn't that what we're supposed to call those?
Manufactured.
Pardon?
Manufactured.
Manufactured, thank you. If we take that consideration with something that replaces it with other kinds of affordable housing, I think that's much more palatable, but also meets that whole goal toward providing more affordable housing, because certainly right now, everything you read about Coeur d'Alene and housing, the last thing we're doing is providing more affordable housing. It's edging and getting tighter and tighter, particularly for that low-cost housing.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I can follow up with that on a couple of the housing issues. And one of the things that as I was going through the comp plan, the partnership conversation all surrounds these questions. Zone changes, and how do we, within the comp plan, say if a zone change comes forward, how do we encourage our commissioners to ask for things within a zone change request that address our affordable housing issues? And is that language that needs to be included into this Part 4 appendix? And part of what had come up during this conversation at our last work group and advisory group meeting was, if we have, for example, a request to change an MH8 to an R17, can the conversation ensue that says what in this change is going to provide local worker housing that we have laid out as a minimum number of units? How are you going to do that? And it helps the government group entity, the decision maker, work with the private sector to say, well, here's our plan to provide that local worker housing, and how do we keep that in the framework of the comp plan is one of the questions too. Whether it's a MH8 that now could be a different density of manufactured homes because they're more affordable to build, or they become townhomes, but there's a restricted occupancy percentage in there. How does that work into giving our commissioners guidance on those zone change requests? I don't know who the question would be to.
So we do have a number of the housing action items in the implementation plan, so starting on page 91, under the growth and development GD1. And we have in here, let's see, so the incentive-based is really the one that we'd be looking at. So if you're looking at, and we've had those conversations with partnerships, so we can't just straight out with a zone change say you have to dedicate a certain number of these as affordable because we don't have inclusionary zoning allowed per Idaho code. But you can do it as an incentive-based. So if, someone is getting an increased density or doing something different, we could work with legal to work on a code to say, okay, well, if you're doing that and it's incentive-based, a certain percentage of that increased density could be then restricted to affordable units over time. It could be deed restricted or something like that. So we did try and have the language in here flexible enough, but provide enough specificity so it's targeting those issues we've talked about.
So that would
The
give enough
partnership.
guidance to the commissioners if there was a specific, if we had, and I think that's what's going to, where I've been wrestling with it, is how are the commissioners going to stay informed about what those goals and those needs are? And as those plans come out, the housing assessment just came out, I'm sure that many of you have it, but within that framework, there's conversation throughout the region of putting forth some sort of a percentage-based formula that says what do we need if we're behind in housing or we need to provide more local worker housing, what is that percentage based on our population? And then how do we meet those needs as a region? So I just want to make sure that what we're talking about in the comp plan addresses ways to give our decision makers the tools they need to ask for those things. So that's part of it. Another thing I had in there was,
Can I interrupt you for a second on
Sure.
that, just to follow up? Let's say we adopt our comp plan here when that gets done, and we have a hearing in P&Z, just as Kiki says, someone comes forward and we have our guidelines here. Are we going to be able to implement this? I mean, Kiki's saying, here's a guideline for us to do it. My thing always is how do we implement what we would like to see done under the, we have some guidelines, but that doesn't mean this is it.
Right, and these provisions in here, these action items will require a code change. So if you adopt the comprehensive plan, the council does, your next zone change that comes through, you can't just say, well, this action item says to start doing this. We have to actually get it into the code. So that's something that we're going to have to work
and that's
on.
part of our next steps in the plan, though. It was said code changes and ordinances, so we're getting to that at the end.
Yeah, and I understand all this, let me just finish, understand all this, and it's can be a frustrating point, because we get a new comp plan, yeah, we know housing is short, mobile home might be an answer, but it doesn't necessarily mean just because we got a comp plan, it's going to happen. We have to go through a code change, and I think that's the most important part of trying to get whatever affordability is, which we haven't defined yet, whether it's a dollar amount or something. We need to get to a point where our codes, we have something to work with as a planning and zoning commissioners before we say, yeah, we can do this. So that's the frustration level that I have all the time.
Multiple votes.
Maybe a more general question, but what is the kind of practical difference between the convening authority lead partner and then city department lead? I mean, I understand city department leads, but if we extend this example, so if one of the goals or one of the activities is to identify incentives for central workforce housing, if there's a convening authority, who ultimately, I mean, how do the resources flow and who's on the hook for the implementation? Is it the convening authority to ensure the resources to implement, or is it the lead partner and the convening authority oversees it to make sure it's in accordance with policy? What's the relationship?
Okay, good question. Yeah, it is a little complicated. So partly the convening authority we came up with as we were looking through all these action items and trying to determine which ones should be in the city's plan and which ones should be in CDA 2030's plan. And it allowed us to identify which group would kind of bring together the lead and supporting partners. And so in particular for the city's plan, any of the joint ones, we would work with CDA 2030 to bring together. So for example, here's one related to waste management. So the convening authority is the city and CDA 2030 working together, but the lead partner is actually the county. But we're kind of bringing them to the table and say, hey, this is a priority. Community said this is an issue. We need to start looking at kind of waste management solutions and best practices. And then there's the other supporting partners, but from the city side, admin and planning are going to kind of shepherd that. So that's why the city departments are on there. So that's one example of that. There's a number of those related to kind of the housing solutions that we've identified different groups. So city's probably the convening, or it might be a joint one because CDA 2030 wants to assist with housing solutions as well. The regional partnership has been named in there kind of as, you know, an entity that would help us as well as the cities and the county, because that's supposed to be a regional effort. And so it kind of, it's case by case, but really who would make sure that it happens is going to be the lead partner. They are going to have to validate it. So if it's, you know, the county's taking the lead on theirs, that's theirs to run with once we get it started. We're just there to kind of assist, if that helps.
Christie?
Thank you. Well, I want to follow up on her very good question because she asked specifically about resources, and I've kind of been looking through this and wondering some of the same things. I know we'll get deeper into the action items as we move on in the discussion, so I won't get too far down. But let's, for instance, some of these action items that have the city of Coeur d'Alene as the convening authority, the lead partner, let's use one of the parks. We have 600 acres of parks right now, 50 miles of wonderful trails, and the plan is let's keep doing more of the same. So that, and then another example is this 5-year sidewalk program to provide improved sidewalks, crosswalks, all good stuff. We want to do it. But I guess my question's to Troy, how do we tie these action items to our budget? Because some of them are saying 1 to 2 years, 1 to 5 years, so that's like right now. How do we commit to these budget items? I hope we can. I want to. These are great plans. How do we do it?
Well, with a strategic goal, then we mold the budget to include those goals like we have in the past. When you make it a priority, we look to get them done. We have a plan now for sidewalk implementation every year. So we have approximately $200,000. We partner with Community Development Block Grant at certain times to get it done. And in the parks, tends to be a partnership opportunity if there's a grant that becomes available. So I would say strategic planning gives you the big goal. It comes back into your plan, which you get to approve and say that's a priority for us to get done.
So signing off on this comp plan, like there's a lot of action items that again immediately ties to our budget, and our budget is always something that we are creatively trying to find ways to fund. So I'm just curious, what is our role if we can't meet some of the action plans? Which I agree with the action plans, they're fantastic. But what if we just can't possibly do some of it? They shoot us, is what Dan says.
If I may, so really, these are recommended timelines, and so it's kind of just looking at the future. We're going to annually look at this and kind of give updates on what's been accomplished, and then every 5 years, we're looking at doing kind of, let's look at the whole implementation plan and shift things around. But absolutely, there's flexibility with this. This is just kind of it's a requirement of the state, first of all, but then secondly, it's just how do we implement these goals and priorities based on all the community input we've received. But you absolutely have flexibility on the timeline, and there's probably going to be, tweaks to who's identified, as a lead partner or a supporting partner, and exactly the language of what happens, like changing the zoning code to deal with housing. There might be some other housing product types we add to the mix. It may not be specifically this.
So that flexibility is key. Thank you, Hillary.
Yeah, and Randy had a great point.
I was just going to say, council sets the priorities.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you look at, there's so many priorities, you wouldn't have enough money in
Right.
20 years to do it all, so it's up to council to decide which ones they want to implement when.
Well, I think she answered well with even if we sign off on this, the flexibility is key. Thank you.
Before we leave the housing page, one of the things that jumped out to me was this was based on 2019 information. And I think that, especially with the University of Idaho housing assessment that just came out, that's using post-pandemic numbers, that we really need to take a look at anything under those housing that gives us the quantities and the percentages of vacancies and occupancy numbers because they're very different than what appears here.
That's good feedback.
Tom?
Hillary, again, on the CDA plan and the comp plan merging together. In the past, our old comp plan was just our comp plan. We really didn't use anything from 2030 before because it wasn't there, or then when it did come about, it didn't meld with the old comp plan. Now we're melding these two together, and as Councilman Wood said, how do we implement these things? I had the same question. And it's kind of like, comp plan isn't going to make those things happen. The comp plan is more a guide for the whole city that we as commissioners have to use to make our decisions. But both of them getting together, it's a broader plan for the whole city, which before developed the old comp plan, which I was part of, it wasn't as broad as that. We kind of just were in our own little bubble and did what we did for the best that we could do at that point in time. And now we have such more vision of what the city needs to be and how it should go that way with CDA and how we implement a lot of the stuff. But again, the implementation of CDA is up to CDA 2030 to do, and City Council to kind of get that implementation going, whatever the timeline is, and the city administrator to fund it. We, as commissioners, are here just to make decisions on code and zoning and things like that. Again, that's why I go back to, if we want to increase how we want the city to do, we have to look at our codes. We've got to look at our codes. Otherwise, everything is just going to stay the same. So I think code changes is probably the next biggest step we have to do. Speaking of that, what's the average time to get a code change or a zone change done between the input, the workload of staff, public hearings, meetings? A general idea. Do you have a?
It depends on how complicated it is. We were working on the core housing code before, and that one, we just realized it was such a big project and needed to slow that one down. If it was something where we've talked about multi-generational housing as a next step, that could be a lot more focused. That could be a pretty quick process, actually, because we could look at another communities. It's very, clean, concise in terms of how we could bring that forward. It's still going to be probably, 4 months at the fastest, just to, and that's really fast. So it really just depends. Mr. Mayor, if I may clarify a little bit on that implementation plan. So you're right that our comprehensive plan, our 2007 to 2027, doesn't have the implementation plan, so this is different with this one. But again, CDA 2030 is going to have their own implementation plan that has different action items that are not the city's. And so I just want to clarify that they're going to run with their plan.
Right.
There are some where we're going to work together with different lead partners to implement those that are regional priorities that truly affect city government. But they have their own plan that's kind of separate and distinct from this. So this plan before you and our implementation plan is truly city-focused for the government, and then things like lake health, where that's a huge priority, transportation networks where it goes beyond city limits, things like that.
But, just a minute, Woody. Going back to Kiki's earlier comment, which I fully support, and that is that we, as a government, aren't going to actually start providing housing or start to control housing. But on the other hand, we do have some leverage when somebody comes in seeking a zone change or for an annexation, where we can work on creating, and affordable housing is still a very nebulous term for us, but I think we have to work on that. I think that right now, our economy, one of the biggest holdbacks to our economy is the affordable housing, getting the labor force in here to be able, which then, because we can't get that in here, we've got businesses that aren't open as much as they'd like to be. And so they can't either produce a product or sell a product because they don't have the workers that they need. So the affordable housing issue is more than just a, gee, it'd really be nice to do that for these people kind of thing. It's something that's really a part of our economy and our economic development to get more serious about that. That's a poor way to express that, but in the past, at least my experience over the years, is that developers have come in and proposed subdivisions, and as long as they kind of fit into the comprehensive plan, that's in terms of the actual level of housing, we've not really tried to regulate that in any way. But I think that when we can figure out what affordable housing is, and I'm sure staff will do a bang-up job of figuring that out, we probably need to take a stronger look at that. Well, not probably, we do need to, because of the effect that it has on our economy. And when I say we, I think it's more of a collective we of Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene, Hayden, Rathdrum, because we're all in this same boat, and we all need to recognize that we're all in that same world of hurt for those folks.
One quick share that may answer some of those questions. And the Housing and Growth Issues Partnership, as I mentioned, is going through a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes what the partnership has been doing for the last year, as well as the key takeaways from the housing assessment. Now, had we been having this conversation after seeing that PowerPoint presentation, your questions may be a little different. A lot of what's happened in the last year through the solutions being examined and discussed with the partnership have been going simultaneously with the housing assessment work being done. So as it's come together, there's a presentation that city councils, organizations, boards, civic groups, we actually ran through it this morning with the Coeur d'Alene Press staff to kind of hammer out the details, and they were brutal, I'll tell you. They were, Devin's in the audience, and she was there and reviewed this PowerPoint presentation that's going to be given. What it does do is summarizes each of the city's separate challenges, what we've done, and it's talking about the redirection as a region that we have to implement some of these solutions. Affordable housing is something that you can define by federal and state guidelines. One of the words we use a lot is local worker housing. And what we want to try to do is find how do we provide that inventory for people who need to live where they work. And those are the goals that the partnership is setting forward to try to get feedback from our city partners and our planners and the community to say, what do we want that to look like? When that presentation is done and we bring forward some of those ideas, it's an evolutionary process as to what leadership wants to implement. And this plan will guide a lot of that, but there are many, many solutions coming forward through that partnership, and that PowerPoint's going to be kind of an educational piece that we start with. So we don't have that educational piece yet, but it's within weeks or a week.
Councilmember Miller, if I may add, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, that was a huge discussion as a part of the community engagement. We heard through every survey, every meeting, housing affordability is it's not just an acute Coeur d'Alene issue. It's regional, and it's Mountain West. It's West Coast. It's happening everywhere as the market is overheated, and it's pushing people out of the market. And I want to stress, I think there's two pieces to that. First is the discussion about affordability. The second piece we heard a lot from the community is about housing choice. And so, a single family home fits for some people at a certain point in your life. A townhome, a condo, an apartment fits at another point in your life, or for a different type of lifestyle that you want. And so what we heard from community members is that we want that choice. We want to be able to provide the opportunities to live or choose which types of housing we want to have, but we also want to have that available to us at a variety of price points. And so the discussion of mobile home parks, for example, that's naturally occurring in affordable housing. It's also in an area that you have land value that's increasing rapidly every day. So that underlying land becomes very attractive to developers or a landowner for what they're going to do. So those are those are key things that the community certainly talked to us about, and I think some of the actions that Hillary brought up about how we maybe address that through code change is something that would happen after the adoption of the comprehensive plan. But it's a big issue, and certainly one that when we thought about land use, it's how do we increase that choice while still protecting single-family neighborhoods.
Did you cross-reference that data with what the realtors are saying? I mean, are the realtors saying that people are coming here looking for townhomes?
I haven't spoken to a realtor, but we do know nationally is that based on demographics by age, family
We're
type,
not talking nationally, we're
composition.
talking Coeur d'Alene. So in Coeur d'Alene, people want single-family homes. They want them on the river, but they want single-family homes. I just want to know who's clamoring for the townhomes.
I think you could look at many of the apartments or condominiums that are around the river or even through your city, and those are in demand. So it may be a person coming from Coeur d'Alene. It may also be a longtime resident who wants, a certain type of housing, and they want that opportunity to choose. So I think the question is, how do you organize your land use system so that you provide that choice for a very diverse community in terms of need, whether that's size, family type, or other.
Hillary and Sean, we've kind of veered off into just affordable housing. Do you want, are there some other issues you want to be sure and get before us relative to the comprehensive plan?
Do you think
Are
we
we
should
good right
go
now?
to the next
Well,
section and
yeah,
then
I
have more
think
questions? Yeah.
we stopped for
Yep.
questions and we kind of went forward on what Alex was going to speak about. So hopefully Alex's his discussion of part 4 will help wrap some of this and answer some of these questions, and then we'll open it up for questions again.
Okay, well, let's move to that then.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Woody.
It's okay. So just to kind of go back to where Tom was coming from in relationship, so code changes and makes the findings. That's the tool they work with, doing your findings, right? Is that what the code is going to, he has to adjust that?
Well, the findings are related to the code, but also the comprehensive plan when you're doing a land use decision. But yes, we need to implement some of these affordable housing and some of these other priority actions. We need to adopt the comprehensive plan first and then take action and update the code. The council would adopt the code amendments and.
We've got to get our comp plan done, and then after that, we can move, depending on how fast you want to move, to all the work Kiki's done, and then how fast the city council wants to make things happen. We need to get this portion straightened out and done. And then from there, staff definitely has priority.
Be a bunch of different things, but really ultimately what it does is it drives what has to happen. And usually that happens at the time of a permit later. So, what tools do we have in the toolbox to say that a townhome is okay? Well, right now you have to have 50 foot of frontage and 5,500 square feet, and that's a single family lot, but in our infill areas, they say you can have a 15-foot frontage and 1,250 square foot lot. Well, that provides a different set of tools to build some of these different types of homes or units that are available across the community.
I was just thinking back, when I was on P&Z, which was a lifetime ago, when Fruitland Lane they wanted to take all those trailer parks out, the ones that are fronting 95, and there was a big discussion, because it was just starting on the corner where the restaurants and that stuff is there now. I think that's, I can't remember the street. So the question was, are they going to keep expanding, and all those mobile homes will go? And these are the old ones, pre-71, so they can't be moved, they're not resalvageable. And I remember P&Z, we said, let's draw a line here. We're just gonna let this develop and let these people, and that created them sewering some of those, because those were on their old holding tanks in those days. So sometimes by drawing the line and saying, we wanna maintain this mobile home park, it helped it generate. Sewer was brought in, the water thing, everything got cleaned up, and I don't remember the findings for it, but it was that spirit of, wait, let them have their commercial here, but let's preserve these, what we called affordable housing back then in the 90s, I think it was,
I don't remember.
But
myself.
again, what are the findings? You had to do the findings to kind of tell it what it could do, and then from the heart, you say, no, this is as far as we want to go right now. And hopefully you can still do that, you know.
We can. We could always say no. But,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to speak just briefly about Part 4, which is land use and design. And there's been a number of questions about, this section of the plan. This is a new section of your comprehensive plan. And so I'll step through place types, what those are. Many of these slides you've seen in previous meetings, but we'll go back through them because it's been a little while. I want to talk about the future land use map. We'll break out each of those place types and how they're applied to the future land use map. And then also, we're not going to step through these pieces, but just to let you know, within land use design, there are also specific sections that talk about special areas and recreation and natural areas. And those are areas that, for example, downtown has specific design guidelines, or natural resource areas that have specific management plans that should be identified as a part of this process in the event that there is a land use action adjacent, so that you can understand the connections between those. But for the main parts of these elements, I want to talk about place types and the future land use map. So just as a reminder of what place types are, they provide general guidance on future land uses within the area of city impact. So we've looked at both the city limits as well as where Coeur d'Alene could grow over time. They implement the vision and guiding principles, and they are implemented through the city's development code. Place types are not code. They are organizing features that help set direction for future growth, whereas your development code talks about today, what can be allowed today and what those pieces are in there. Just to show you an example, each place type identifies the key characteristics, whether it's single family, multifamily, mixed use, employment areas. It discusses specific types of uses that might be allowed in there. The types of transportation systems. In older neighborhoods, you have a gridded street system as opposed to maybe other areas where it's more curvilinear. So they just give you general guidance on the types of development and characteristics within a specific one, in this case, compact neighborhood. The other important piece for this, and this ties directly to zoning and Commissioner Messina's questions about how we actually implement this and how these come in, each place type has a series of compatible zoning designations with that. So the place types don't change zoning, they help inform those future decisions within those areas. So for example, within compact neighborhood, R12, R17, neighborhood commercial are typical zones that you would find within this place type. So again, they're organizing features that you can use over time to help address growth and discussions about growth within the city. A new feature for the comprehensive plan is a future land use map. And so we'll step through each of these major elements, these colors on the side, the land use types. As part of this process, and we look through the community, looking back, even back to the kickoff, we actually started talking about this in September 2019. What are the key elements and areas of growth or stability that we want to maintain within the city? And what we heard loud and clear was that we really need to focus on protecting existing single-family neighborhoods. And so you'll see as I step through this, with these place types, they do just that. So all of the residential neighborhoods are assigned specific single or other types of neighborhood amenity or neighborhood place types, really depending on what's there today. So if you have smaller lots but single-family homes, you'll have a place type associated with that, as opposed to large lot, single-family residential, there's a different place type that accommodates that. So again, these place types don't change zoning, they just help organize in general time, kind of where growth could occur in the future and what type of growth that might be. So the first piece, single-family neighborhood, that's shown in light yellow. Those are your lowest density areas, R3, R5. Those are areas that primarily are outside of your area of city impact, but also some larger lots within the city limits. And so those areas are already primarily developed. Place types are assuming that those areas really won't change over time. So they maintain that development characteristic. Just some examples, what you see typically within these areas, different types of housing, but generally single family. Other areas, particularly in older parts of Coeur d'Alene, there's actually smaller lots, 5,000 square foot lots, 3,000 square foot lots, and you'll see within the compact and the urban area, compact is that lighter yellow, urban is where it becomes a little bit more dense. Lighter yellow are, again, existing neighborhoods that are already fairly developed. There are a few vacant lots within those areas that you might see developed with infill development. But a lot of the higher scale, more the urban neighborhoods, I'm going to show you some images of those. Those are along the corridors, Sherman Avenue, along areas potentially for future growth that are being planned for now. So we accommodated and looked at what was being planned in the future outside of city limits and applied different types of place types to show what future growth might be. And again, many of these will look familiar to you. You're seeing these all over the city, these types of uses, which are still single-family homes, but also a mix of small-scale apartment or townhome. Again, very similar to what is in those existing neighborhoods now. Mixed use is a new place type. Currently, you don't have a mixed use zone, and so when we thought about, what the community was telling us, where future development might occur, again, in the early parts of this project, we looked at vacant and potentially redevelopable areas. A lot of those areas were within existing older commercial zones, along major corridors, older areas that had large parking lots that were either vacant or underdeveloped. And so when we started to think about what the community was telling us about greater walkability, more housing choice, other types of uses that mix both housing and services, we started to look at, one, your existing plans that already start to talk about that, but also areas where that might start to occur over time. And those are really focused around those core commercial areas, but also key intersections to really help promote both that visibility, but also, to be honest, take advantage of some of the very little vacant land that you have within the city. And so mixed use, we looked at 3 different scales. Smaller scale uses, which might be 2 or 3 story buildings, to potentially larger uses on larger sites that could be 5 to 6 stories. And those are areas that, either have larger areas are vacant or, were identified by the community for, additional scale growth. You have a great downtown. It has a great urban core. You have an historic area. You have growth around that. Downtown is also, very focused in terms of its zoning, its design. So we identified a place type for downtown specifically because it does have a specific flavor to it, both old and new. And so with this in particular, there are a variety of scales that are happening downtown, whether or not it's the resort on the river to smaller 1 and 2 story Main Street buildings. So this place type in particular allows a variety of those uses that maintain the character of downtown. Just a couple others, retail, corridor center, and industrial. You have great, large-scale retail through many of these corridors. We've maintained that. We've identified those along the corridors. But also, larger-scale industrial and manufacturing. Those are aligned primarily with your existing manufacturing areas. But they identify, where those specific locations might occur, and if you were to increase that over time, where they might be. Some examples. Some of these look familiar because they're from Coeur d'Alene. I'll stress too, these could include office parks. They could include 1 to 2 story buildings that you're seeing up and down kind of the northern part of Coeur d'Alene. Research facility, all of those things that where people actually make stuff and they design things. Employment center. Part of this is focused specifically in the Kootenai Health area. That's an area that there's been a lot of discussion about, but also is envisioned in the future to be, a large employment center. But also in the northern part of the city, looking at some of those office parks and other areas that are really focused around the office park and core employment areas that have a high concentration of employees, but have fewer residential units within them. So it's really kind of it's a very specific type of place type. Again, just some examples of what we're seeing within Coeur d'Alene that resembles that. And then civic is a bit of a unique place type. Civic place types can occur all over the city. They can include parks, schools, both middle school, elementary school, up to the university. They're kind of specific in terms of what they offer. They're both community amenities, but also they provide kind of unique services or benefits. So those are lumped into a single civic place type. We had decided to have them have their own place type because they are a bit unique in how we treat them throughout the city. And so we felt it was important to identify those. And then just a couple more. Plan development, Coeur d'Alene has a lot of planned unit development, so we use place types as a way to align that. Plan development can occur under any zone. There are specific requirements within the code, but because the existing plan development has, unique qualities within that development through, specific, site-specific types of development and agreements, we identify these areas with a specific place type because they don't quite fit in a lot of ways, because they're slightly different than what the underlying zoning typically allows, because there's been agreements for that. So we felt it was important to bring those out and identify specifically where that's already occurred, and a way to identify, where those locations are. Some examples. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Alex, really quick, also the historic place type.
Oh, yes, thank you.
So we didn't have, there's not a map for that, but we did create that based on city council's direction, so that's in there as well as a place type.
That's correct. Thank you, Hillary, for reminding me. Yeah, so that, kind of with that place type, we're assuming as historic areas are designated, that would be a place type that would be added to the map over time. So it's essentially a placeholder now, but one that we expect will be used in the near future.
All right, thank you, Alex. And so, in our previous Q&A section that we just went through, there were some questions, how does this look like, or what does this look like? How are we going to use it? And before I dive into the staff report, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. So strategic planning, and that is a lot of the action items that we see in the both joint and the city-led items. Those are those are specific actions that the city can do, such as changing code or providing assistance to other community partners to get things done. Another one is seeking grants. And one of the things that we see when we go after grants is a question on the grant application: is this in your comprehensive plan? And so what they're really asking is, did City Council and Planning Commission discuss this already, and is there support to do this before we say, oh, well, here is this lump of cash to go and do this thing, and then there's a bunch of infighting with City Council and Planning Commission, and they end up having to not issue the funds because nobody had thought about those opportunities prior to applying for the grant. And so it does provide some vision into what we would seek as far as grant funding goes into the future. So with that, I'll shut this down real quick and open up a mock staff report. So Planning Commission, I know I had shown this to you before. I just concentrated on the comprehensive plan portion of the document. I'll go through it a little bit more thoroughly now. So sorry you have to sit through it again. So we came up with one that we thought, well, what are the issues of today? And one of them is affordable housing. And so this is a mock staff report that was based upon the request of Habitat that came forward asking for a zone change from R12 to R17. It was 1.5 acres approximately, and this has already been approved. So your staff report will look very similar to what we have now, what the applicant and owner is, what the request is, some background information of the site and what is close by, that sort of thing. Some mapping. You're still going to have where the subject property is and some of the nearby amenities that are close by. Here's a zoomed in picture showing that. Here are those amenities that I just mentioned. Prior land use actions, so over time what has been approved or denied in the area. So these are all the zone changes that are close by that the city has seen. Green is approved, so it looks like there's been a number of changes throughout the years all the way back to 1992. So this is where the rubber hits the road, the required findings that we've been talking about. This very first finding, which is B8, is that the proposal is or is not in conformance with the comprehensive plan policies. So what you've seen up to this point is the 2007 comprehensive plan stuff, and you can remember, that we have urban reserve, and is it stable established, and that is the deepest that our current plan goes as to what land use may be in the future. So there's only 3 categories. Now, as Alex has pointed out, there's a bunch of different categories to look at, and this is that future land use map that that Alex just discussed and all the different uses that are, the different place types that are inside of that. And so this is where this subject property is right now. And when you zoom in, you can see that this area points to a compact neighborhood. This is a description of what that compact neighborhood is. Here's what Alex was presenting earlier, and you can see that R12, R17, and NC is appropriate types of zoning inside of that area. So what's close by as far as the network? We can see as far as bicycle network goes, there is existing bicycle network that is close by. There is some that is planned out and will hopefully happen in the future to where these connections are envisioned to happen over the next 20 years. Where the existing sidewalk network is, so there is some sidewalk there. It's not directly on the property, but it is adjacent. And then you take those sidewalks and those and the bicycle paths, and then how do you access the transit, the larger transit network that is inside of Coeur d'Alene that's represented by CityLink. And so this goes into much more depth than our current plan does. Then the goals, objectives, and action items, sometimes most likely we're going to stop at the objective level at this because many of the actions won't tie directly into one of these land use requests. So inside of here you can see that under community identity we have goal CI3, which is Coeur d'Alene will strive to be livable for median and below income levels, including young families, working class, low income, and fixed income households. And the objective is to support efforts that preserve existing housing stock and provide opportunities for new, affordable, and workforce housing. And that can be found under the community and identity area. Growth and development, we have a GD1, which is develop a mix of land uses throughout the city that balance housing and employment while preserving the qualities that make Coeur d'Alene a great place to live. And objective GD 1.1 is achieve a balance of housing product types and price points, including affordable housing to meet city needs. So Planning Commission and City Council, you will evaluate this and decide based upon all of the different findings, so we can go through those and step through those, is this appropriate at this time? So finding B9 is that public facilities and utilities are or not available. So you'll still be receiving comments from all of our departments. You know, is stormwater adequate? Are the streets adequate? Is water adequate? Sewer, can we service the property? You know, the fire department, are they able to service the property? Once in a while, police will weigh in and say, hey, yes, we have a problem with this, or no, we have no concerns. In this case, they had no concerns. And evaluation of that. Another finding for zone changes is that the physical characteristics of the site do or do not make it suitable. So what are the physical characteristics of the site right now? We dive in a little bit farther and show, well, it's pretty flat there, so, you know, hillside isn't a problem at this site. There's not going to be some hazardous development, and if it was, there's a portion of our comprehensive plan that we would have included earlier directly talking about hillsides, and then reference the code, which Woody had talked about a little bit earlier. So we have two pieces there. The hillside piece in the comprehensive plan that says, hey, keep an eye out for these areas, and then the code that says, okay, when you pull a building permit, you got to have a geotech report. You have to save the significant trees. So that's the code-related items. So, and then also some photographs of what the area looks like. This one is pretty heavy on photographs, so I'll move through these a little quicker. Almost there. So evaluation of that specific finding. I believe this is the last finding, is would it or would it not adversely affect the surrounding neighborhood with regard to traffic, neighborhood character, and or existing land uses. So we get some traffic information from engineering and what the surrounding land uses are. A lot of the times when you guys receive public feedback, when somebody gets up here and says, hey, I like this or I don't like this, this is the area that they tend to concentrate on, you know, traffic, and I walk my dog there right now, and how is this going to affect my neighborhood and my property values? This is the section they usually hone in on. So the generalized land use patterns, you know, this is the way that the properties are being used right now. This one will be a civic use in the future as Habitat for Humanity. It's ultimately a single family attached, so there's multiple units that would be attached there. And then the commercial areas that are nearby and some single family as well as multifamily. And then what our zoning map looks like right now, currently it's R12, they're asking for R17, so this area would move to this yellow color. And then all of those codes, what R12 is, what is allowed by right, and these are the code items that the questions have come up on over this presentation, as well as what the R17 district is and what those uses are. So it shows you in code what we have now and what's proposed. What the structure types are, height, setbacks, those sorts of things, parking requirements, what the applicable codes and policies are, all the utilities need to be underground, streets have to be improved, etc., and then whether or not there's any proposed conditions. So each one of these departments may come forward and say, hey, you know what, the water is deficient here, they're going to have to upgrade the water line from a 4-inch to a 6-inch or an 8-inch or something. That's where you'll get these proposed conditions that say, hey, if you decide to pass this, please do us a favor and put these conditions in there so that we know that this will be successful when it gets built out. And then what sort of ordinances and standards that we use to review the request, and then we ask you to weigh on that and make a decision to approve, deny, or deny without prejudice. And you'll have a finding worksheet that's usually attached.
Sean, I have a question.
Sure.
I seem to remember us sitting through zone changes. They come in and they show you the fancy-dancy things they're going to do. The zone gets changed because you go, wow, that's a great project, and then it's not the project. Is there any defense of that, or in our new stuff, that if you say you're going to do something that you should, or?
So that's a little bit different than a comprehensive plan. I guess the comprehensive plan is going to give you kind of what we have now and what we envision in the future. What you're talking about is like a development agreement where you would tie a developer to a specific use in the future. So if I go back up here to the plan, you can see the uses by right. So in R17, you may do any one of these things. So there is the ability maybe to condition some of these things, but we haven't in the past. We've said, okay, well, C17 allows this host of different uses. They may say, hey, we want to do this specific one, but the moment the ink's dry and that C17 is in place and there's an ordinance to change the zone to C17, they may put it on the market and sell it to someone else that has grandiose plans for a different one of those uses. So that's what you're talking about.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of just this one with the habitat and civic and all those types of things. Are they locked into, they're not going to turn around and sell it at R17?
For Habitat to do that, I don't believe Habitat would ever do something like that.
I agree.
Now, a private developer, maybe they have some problems with financing or something, and it makes more sense for them to put it on the market. The ones where we get things that are tied down are special use permits. And you can remember a lot of those. You sat on Planning Commission for a number of years. And so for these ones, they're asking for something special that can happen in that zone that is not currently allowed in that zone. And so they're coming to Planning Commission specifically for approval of one of these uses. And then you can say, yes, you must meet your site plan that you gave us because the site plan is required. And so you condition that they must put the parking here, they must put the building there, it must be this use. That's where you get that specificity. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Can I follow up on that? So let's use one of my favorite examples, which is Lilac Glen. So Lilac Glen was a C17 in the middle of an R3. So we rezoned R3 to C17. How would that play out in this current with these place types? So I'm assuming that with an R3, it would be single family, would be the place type for that area. If a developer came in and said, we're going to do C17 in the middle on this R3, how does that play out in a staff report?
Okay. And so Lilac Glen, that's an interesting one. So they were going back to 2014 for that one, but it was partially in the city, partially outside of the city. There was a zone change request, there was special use request, there was subdivision request. It was 5 parts on a hillside. So it was a lot, I guess is what I'm saying. There was a whole lot of different things happening there. And so let me get this up. And so where we're talking about is kind of up in this area, and a portion of that, it falls under a planned unit development.
Well, it didn't though before, so I'm.
No,
assuming-
actually, a portion of it wasn't even in city limits.
Right, so how would that be presented in a staff report as being compatible with the comp plan?
So depending on where it is, in this case, let's say we just went a little bit farther north,
Okay.
it anticipates, hey, this is a difficult area out here. It's outside of city limits, and there is some, a lot of hillsides up here. You know, they got to be serviced by, there's not even the water pressure to service them in a lot of cases. And we'll hear from those departments explaining that. But outside of this, in our ACI right now, everywhere over here is envisioned to be single family. And so you're not going to see a request, I guess, that I want to put in apartments up on a hillside.
But as a property owner, they would have the right to apply.
They certainly can apply.
Okay.
What we would do is we would have them first, they would have to come forward and say, hey, your comprehensive plan doesn't envision this. We need to change this land use map to show that this is something that we envision. So we bring that to you first to update the land use map, and then their application can move forward.
Okay, who's you? Is that just planning or is that city council?
It's both.
Sean, if I can add to, Councilor Gookin, so the place type is meant to provide guidance exactly for that reason. Within each place type, there's certain zones that are identified, existing zones that are identified. So if an applicant were to come in and want to upzone that to C17, currently the way the single-family place type is organized is that it would only allow R1, R3, R5, and some R8, I believe. So if they are going above and beyond that, that would not be compatible with that place type. And so that would provide guidance to Planning Commission when that zone change came forward, that this is not in line with the policies or the future land use plan for the city of Coeur d'Alene. So that's the first piece of guidance that's new for this project. You have that additional level of guidance on where those zone changes might actually occur. The second piece, and the other piece, an applicant could offer to amend the future land use map to a different place type. But again, that's another process that would be required to do that. So you are adding a layer of complexity to address specifically those types of issues where you may not want that type of density or that type of use. So that's what the place type does, is just helps provide that broad guidance.
But would that also be the role of, say, the planning department would be to guide someone who wants to do a project into where we've already shown this would be a better spot for you guys?
Right. When we get a cold call from somebody who says, hey, I'm interested in buying these 20 acres, what can I do with it? What does the comprehensive plan say that I can do with it? We can pull out this map and say, we envision it to be this type of place type.
That's correct.
Nice. So it really does protect the existing established neighborhoods.
It does, and this is also based, if you remember, we looked at a number of scenarios back when we were looking through the public engagement on, do we develop in a corridor strategy? Do we look at a major hub in the middle, or do we look at smaller districts? And so we took input from the public on those options, as well as what we heard from both planning and zoning and city council to develop this map. And so the growth is really focused in areas of, not necessarily away from single family, but in areas that complements existing development, and really looks at where those opportunities are to provide some different types of housing or uses.
As I understand place types, you're doing an overlay of what the existing zoning and development is that correct?
So there's, as we started it, we looked at your existing zoning and land use patterns, just to get a sense of where everything is today. Then we took community input on how do we want to grow over time, or where do we want to grow? And so that's where we started to develop those place types for what is the community telling us for areas that they want to focus on versus areas they want to maintain. And then we developed that overlay, or that overarching structure of the place type to be able to encourage or restrict that. And so
The
it's,
overlay actually goes beyond our current zoning map. If this area is zoned for, say, single family, by virtue of the studies, we may actually have a wider area now, or is the place type simply corresponding, overlapping the zoning?
so the place types, if you think of place types at about 10,000 foot level, so you're looking at broad swaths of different types of land uses. And so the single family place type's a good example because it incorporates multiple single family zones. So that's why you see, rather than 8 single family residential colors, you see 1. And so that's generally what we want to see within those areas. So it's a way to, at a broad scale, organize land use within the city and then allow, and that's the future. And then with zoning, that's focusing on today. And so that's really where, how they fit together, is like, place types is where we want to go. That acknowledges what's there today. Existing zoning is, somebody's coming in and they want to develop a parcel, this is what we can do. And so that's how zoning, that's kind of the differences between zoning and place
I'll
type.
get back to what Commissioner Goodwin was asking. I mean, I've worked with master plans and so on before, and comp plans, and they're generally a guideline. In fact, I think this starts by saying it's a guideline, but the place type almost sounds like a fixed limitation. If someone comes before us and they want to upzone some property that falls within a certain place type, we're really obligated to deny that, if I understand it correctly.
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the place type gives you another lens to look at a project. If, for example, you have an applicant coming in, let's say, for example, it's affordable housing. They have purchased a property, it meets a number of the goals within the comprehensive plan. Planning and zoning agree that this meets the intent of the comprehensive plan, but it doesn't meet the place type need, then that would be a conversation about, do we adjust the place type for that area? So it's a way to expand the conversation about development within the community by also providing that extra overlay of, is this really meeting what we want it to do over the next 20 years?
Alex, thank you. I just one other thing, if you don't mind. Getting back to what Commissioner McEvers was asking. I know you cannot condition zoning, but I understand exactly what he's saying. Some give them the magnificent plan, we give them the zoning, and bingo, they sell it off and build something else. I don't believe we have the right to condition, to require a condition, a voluntary covenant from a developer, that they will only build what is shown on the plan they present to us. And if we choose to say, well, I'm not going to vote for it unless you give us a covenant, I think we are still probably in violation of the requirements to condition zoning. And I don't know if I guess, can I legally do that? Say, look, you don't want to condition it, you're not going to get my vote. Voluntarily condition it. I'm not imposing it.
He looks at Randy.
Theoretically.
Theoretically. May I clarify, we do have the ability to do conditional zoning in our code. It's allowed by the state and it's in our code, and we've only done it once, I think, for the tablet cabinets. That one came forward, and we did add a condition, but adding, like, the covenants is a little bit different, and that's, yeah, important.
Zone changes are not of right. They can be denied. And I think we can look at those conditions on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Not the answer I wanted, but the one I expected.
The comprehensive plan is broad enough that you need to decide what are your priorities on any decision that you're making, because there are competing priorities.
If I could, while this slide is up there, Sean, and Alex, Sean, Hillary, I think you've done a great job with this thing. I think there's been a real challenge. During the pandemic, you talked about that. There's been 20-some months in progress or whatnot. And I've asked myself from the get-go, kind of begin with the end in mind, thinking, if you will, is what's better? What's better here than the plan we have now? And I keep coming back to this. And I've told you both in the last meeting that, this mock staff report, I think, really paints the picture to me of what's better here. We have, not to throw the old comp plan under the bus, but if you can envision those, blocked areas, the woodland area, is one area, the 95 corridor, we have these general areas, and they pop up in the staff report. And they're pretty darn general, and I think that's caused frustration up here, and maybe with y'all, you can almost kind of, well, does the C-17 fit in here, or doesn't it? Does the R-12, whatever, does it fit? This really, I think, locks it down a lot better in terms of what is and isn't compatible. Just boom, there it is. Someone could still come in and ask, I guess, for a C-17 here. You're telling them right up front, you've got a real uphill battle to try to sell that, because it says, boom, right there, it's not compatible. But this, to me, I think, takes a lot of the, a little bit of the subjectivity and a little bit more protecting neighborhoods and whatnot, and this and that. So I really like this piece of it,
So, quickly, thank you, John, I appreciate the comments. To answer your question a little bit deeper, is when MIG and I were working on these place types, that's one of the very first things we said is, okay, we've identified these place types. What are the zones that may be compatible in there? And so you'll see down here where it says identified compatible zoning, there's usually a range of different zones, but it stops short of being commercial. There's a neighborhood commercial that may be okay to put in here where someone can go and grab a loaf of bread or a cup of coffee or something like that. So we really did dive down in there and look at this and say, okay, well, someone may come forward with something that may be a little bit different, but what is that range of zones that would be compatible with their request or not? And like John said, hey, if they come in for C-17, we're going to say, well, that's quite the hurdle. You might want to look at updating the land use map first and see if council and planning commission is comfortable with that before making that request.
And one last spin on that you touched on a little bit, sorry, is we can tend to look at this as, this comp plan is for us, this is for us, this is for us, you guys, or us guys, that it's the communities as well. And let's put yourself in the seat of the developers, and like you said, if I'm, a developer around town, I can pretty quickly see what can fly and what isn't, rather than it being vague.
And go through all that effort to be
wasted
denied.
time and all that, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've changed my mind about these things too, because I really didn't understand them at first. I mean, to me, it was like a Trojan horse. It's like we're going to get in under the zoning and change things. And so I agree with John. It really helps us make that decision. I have some feedback on the downtown place type. One of the goals actually says to reduce the environmental impact of Coeur d'Alene, which is vague, but I understand what they're trying to say. For downtown to really be successful, you need services. And I think we need to encourage services downtown. Right now, if you live downtown in one of the towers, you go to Costco, so you drive there, or you drive to Safeway or Albertsons or Fred Meyer. We need services downtown if we want to have a successful downtown. And this was in the Glenn Miles report that was done 25 years ago. You need services. I would also like to say, just for myself, I would like to see some protection into the historic nature of Sherman Avenue. I've floated height restrictions before to council, and they didn't seem to be too excited about that. Maybe perhaps some type of stair-step arrangement where there are lower heights on Sherman, and then they can gradually increase outside of there. Because I understand that, if our downtown's going to be successful, it's going to grow, it's going to thrive, people are going to want to live down there, but they're going to need services. And the peeps are going to want to keep that historical nature of downtown, specifically Sherman Avenue, so the growth should happen outside that. That's just my 2 cents.
Christie?
Mr. Mayor, and I would like to just talk overall about the plan too. I think it's very well done. A lot of time and effort, and the goals and the action plans are really good. I would say though, before it comes before council on February 15th, I think for our purposes, for council purposes, I'd like to see our administrative team start to have the conversation, bring forward some kind of conversation to us with a 5-year strategic plan. Because a lot of these action items involve our planning department. I can't imagine we can accomplish with the personnel we have. The police and fire and parks department are all impacted. That's fine, but we need a strategic plan tied to the budget. And I want to have that conversation, start of the conversation as we adopt this comprehensive plan.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Can we split this?
Christy, or Mayor.
Go ahead.
I have a clarifying question, and I agree with you. I think that is a mountain of a task between now and February, what's the date, 15th?
Oh,
So I
not
want
the
to be
plan.
clear on
Yeah,
what you're
no, not the
asking.
plan. Conversation on how we're going to kick off a strategic plan that covers the next 5 years and ideas about what they would need our help with to assist them.
So a framework or?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
But again, I just want to, I think Hillary pointed out on the strategic plan, it's the first in position placeholder. If it's the city, then we're the ones that are kind of taking the role and getting that particular item done. If it's the Department of Transportation or if it's Scutney County, those are the people that have to do it. So there might be a large number of items in the strategic plan, but how many of the cities that I think is the responsibility of city council? Well, let's say, okay, this is where we are. How are we going to do this?
Right.
With Troy's help, I take it down the road.
Exactly, thank you.
Does that pretty much take care of us, or?
Hillary Anderson will come up here and talk about the future hearings that we've kind of just alluded to. And
the next
what
steps?
are. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we had a question and answer, but I came a little early. I think we've got there.
All right, great. So, Councilwoman Wood already mentioned kind of the scheduling for the city council. So we're looking at trying to get this document adopted in February. As I mentioned, we've been at this for 27 months, and we've, I think, done all we can to engage the community to make sure that we have heard them and have reflected their vision and their priorities, and we validated that through the process with the help from CDA 2030 and community volunteers. So we're looking at having the public hearing with Planning Commission on February 8th with a recommendation to City Council, and then coming to City Council on February 15th for public hearing and plan adoption. So of course, both of those meetings would have opportunities for the public to come and express concerns, ask questions, all of that, and we would be able to address anything. But that's kind of what we're looking at, and really kind of the impetus is so we can start on these next steps. It's critically important to get the plan adopted so that we can begin working on these priority action items that you have stated today, and we've been hearing from the community and over again. We really need to update our impact fees, start working on these housing solutions. That includes looking at the short-term rental code, working on the housing designation, or the historic designation, sorry, for some of the historic neighborhoods in the community, and there are a number of other ones, but those ones were ones that we know are kind of short-term on the docket of priorities, and so just really wanted to stress to you that we'd love any, feedback, any critical changes from you so that we can package this up and bring this forward for those 2 public hearings and adoption.
Kiki?
Hillary, thanks. I had a couple questions just to clarify this. Getting the updated information in the plan is something that you're going to do as far as those new numbers and et cetera. And then there wasn't a historic place type, which is maybe what Councilmember Gookin was looking at when he referred to Sherman Avenue. And there was discussion about that. Are you going to add a historic place type to the place types list?
There is one in there, so.
It's called Historic Overlay. It's the last one within that. And so it's not designated with on the map because we don't have that as an area yet. So that's essentially when that comes in, or if that comes in the future, you'd use that place type.
So that would be something we would add to the map later on?
Correct.
Based on what it is?
Now, we could potentially, if you'd like to, on the map now, so we have Fort Grounds has the historic designation that they've gone through that process, so it's possible we could add that one and the downtown. The Garden District hasn't gone through that formal process yet. That's underway. We're seeking grant funds from the
I
state
guess that's what
to
I
do
was
that.
asking, is that since we
Right.
have 3 potential historic place type areas that we already have identified by border, maybe it would make sense to add that map now rather than wait and have us add it later.
Hillary, can I ask a question? If this gets through P&Z, goes to city council, it gets passed, let's say, and we want to add a place type later, as Kiki was saying, maybe one or two more or something, what's the process to do that, and how long would that take to accomplish?
So it's similar to what would be a code amendment, so it's just an amendment to the plan. And so it's something that, in that case, it would be staff initiated that we would bring it forward. So it's pretty straightforward in that process, unless it's something that we require a lot of public engagement. If it's something that's, we've already heard, and it was just something that, maybe it was an oversight that we missed it, and so we would add that.
Because we've already done
follow that same process.
some of the work that the people in, I believe, in the Garden District.
Right.
They've done a lot of their footwork already. So there's a number of neighborhoods, I think, at least the Garden District, that have already done it, and if we do, or they decide they want that, it's a short window. It's not going to be a drawn-out, long process to get that place type in, perhaps?
Well, so we have a historic place type in there. To do the Garden District historic designation is a process
Right.
through the state. So I guess those are two different things.
I guess what I'm thinking is, rather than come back and say, we already have the historic place type, it's just not on the map, but we already know that we have at least 3 historic place areas, let's just put it in now, and we don't have to go through that amendment process. Was my comment on
I
the
definitely see what you're saying, but you have to realize too that we started this process in late 2019, and we didn't even have a historic preservation ordinance at that time, and that's only recently happened, and we saw that coming, and so we, Alex and I worked on this to get this in the plan with Hillary's help. And so now they're starting to come forward, and we have some, and it's like, well, at some point, we've got to bring this plan forward.
Right,
We may
and
have
I'm
to
not
update it in the
criticizing
future,
the
but-
decision to do that. I'm just saying, while we have this,
Right.
to add that one item to the map and not
So-
have to do it later makes sense, is all.
Staff would be fine if we wanted to add that now. I guess the one thing to be clear on is it doesn't add the protection yet, right? So we also need to come up with that code language that's kind of that opting in for those neighborhoods. So that was kind of how we saw that, as we were coming up with this overlay designation for the future land use map and for the place types. And then we would work on the code amendment and allow the neighborhoods to come forward and say, we want to opt into this historic overlay and kind of have our own protections, and whatever that means. We restrict certain types of housing or, things like that. But if you want it to be structured in a different way to kind of allow that process, we had just heard from council before that we didn't think you wanted to be the ones to designate that, but if you'd like to place it on a map, and we just kind of change what that means for the code, we're fine with that.
If you place it on the map, doesn't it still make it optional? I mean, the map is just, this is a guideline, this is an area.
And I guess it can look at it the other way too. It kind of sets a framework for those neighborhoods to come in and say, we want to opt in because you've established us as a historic area.
I'd rather have it be democratic, have them opt in and vote on it.
And if Councilmember Miller, I think part of the benefit of the place type is you have implementing ordinance underneath through zoning. And so it may be important to have those pieces together before you assign a place type onto a map. Because particularly if that's gonna be a very specific designation on a singular parcel or a neighborhood. As Councilmember Gookin mentioned, it may be something you'd want to consider as a part of the broader historic overlay implementation. So that would be a code change and a plan amendment, essentially, is what that would look like. It's definitely in the plan, but it's something we'd want to, I think, consider just from a timing standpoint and from a democratic standpoint, Councilor Gookin, making sure that you're not putting something in there that you may not want that extra regulation.
It's just trying to save time.
Nope,
We appreciate it.
And as an output, we will have full GIS that the city will have as a part of their system. So as plan amendments do come up, or even staff reports, all of that information will be incorporated into the city's database for land. So those things will be relatively easy to bring up as needed.
And to
Len?
Yeah, 2 things on my list. Under environment and recreation, we mention a lot about water here, nothing about air, except for one word of air. I'd like us to see if we can strive to improve air quality through multiple prong efforts involving traffic, vehicles, tree canopy, roadways, transit routes. I think we need to incentivize the incorporation of electrical outlets in our commercial buildings, and I'm getting it all the time now in residential. Everybody wants to plug in that EV in their own garage. I think we need to incentivize it. I think we need to put it at a top priority. We're talking 10 years out and 20 years out, and we're moving that direction. The other thing is air quality. We've got smogust now. We don't have August. We have smogust, smoke and breathing problems put people in the hospital. So I want to see what we can do to do our best to reduce our output into the CO2 and destroying the atmosphere. The other thing that's big for me, and this is tied in as much, it helps the housing issues. After someone earns $4,000 a month, they spend $1,200 a month on rent. Right after that, they spend almost $1,000 to keep their car on the road, licensed, gassed, and parked. We need to take that out of that equation, give them that $1,000 back through transit. If we can get KMPO, our cities around us, to give us a bus system that gets you from home to work to recreation. If you get on the bus at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. and get to the hospital, you got to make that 12-hour shift and get back on that bus, and you got to go an hour around to get back where you started. I think we need, instead of a loop system, and I think the tribe kicked us off beautifully, but I think that we need to make sure that people have a rapid way to get home after an exhausting 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. And we're not there. And I think that the time is now. We've got the routes, we've got a lot of loops, but we're not supplying that to the service workers, the ones of the long shift, the ones who can't afford a car or can't license a car and are driving illegally, and putting more pressure on our roads. So I want to see what we can do to get not just bike and ped, but a real vision for where we need to be on bus systems, transit systems that are efficient, clean, safe. And we're there. We have this system. I just think it needs to be more focused on apartment dwellers, lower income, service industry, workers. And we've got industrial parks in Hayden that have a huge draw, and somebody has to get in a car every day and move from Post Falls all the way up there. Is there a way to get them there effectively? And should we be doing more on our side to demand that change? So I'm fanatical when it comes to disabilities. I have a son who's epilepsy. He can never drive. He needs to get on a bus and get somewhere and go to a job. He has 3 degrees, but he can't drive a car. So there's a lot of people. We have people with macular degeneration. We have an aging populace. We have blind. We have 1,200 blind and impaired residences in the Kootenai County area. So I think that we're not addressing that public, and that's a missing stratum that we are overlooking. You know, well, not everyone can have a car, and not everyone can afford a car. And it's going to be more and more problematic to get our service workers from wherever they can afford to live to get down to that job at the Coeur d'Alene Resort. So that's my speech, and I was told to keep it short. But try hard.
I have a shorter one. I'm going to come back just to basic details. I need the font size on this stuff to be bigger, bolder. Colors on the maps and things are just brutal for us old guys. I need contrast. I love looking at maps, but they're like miniature. And if this is going to be a book, right? It's going to be this size, so.
It'll be horizontal, so it'll be a little bit bigger.
Okay. Yeah, I've just, well, ask the old guy mayor, he probably knows too. Contrast is really important. Contrast, we need colors.
Order!
Yes, dealing with our aged population, right there.
That's right.
Our online version, you can
Thank
zoom
you.
in though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's at
Absolutely.
City of Coeur d'Alene, and it'll be updated. It's at the City of Coeur d'Alene site, right? So you can,
Thank you. I'm done.
you can stretch it.
Yeah, we prefer the term experienced citizen.
Thank you. Thank you.
The greater wisdom. Thank you very much, Planning Commission, for taking the time. Thank you, Council, for taking time, and staff, thank you for the work. I think we've gotten about as far as we can get today. Tom, if you want to entertain a motion to adjourn?
I would set a motion or ask for a motion to adjourn the planning and zoning portion of this workshop.
So move.
Second.
I have all in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Get out of here.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion to second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.